Okay, I think it's 11:30, so we can get started. Does somebody mind closing the door, actually? Thank you. Oh, bummer.
Oh, really?
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the VCON working group. As you've probably seen in others, we should follow the note well. Make sure you agree to all these. And also make sure you log into the participant thing and join the queue. We want to make sure we're being respectful in our conversations and make everyone feel comfortable. Like I said, please log into the tool, join the queue if you want to speak at the microphone to respect the online participants. And these are the resources if you need to access them. Getting a major delay. So this is the proposed agenda. Any bashing that anyone wants to do? Any additions, deletions? Okay. Then I think we can get started. I wanted to start just sort of level setting. From the last meeting, we discussed splitting of the documents, and that did happen. But I just wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page. There was a little bit of coordination with the chairs and the authors on this. So the original draft that we had was the VCON container 03. We split that up into three documents, an overview document that provides overview. It's an informative document. It provides use cases. We split out the core document that Dan's going to talk about, which is the core protocols and focuses on that. And then we talked about the contact center extension with sort of corresponding model of talking about how we extend VCON more generally as well. So we can get into that discussion. There was a action item at the last meeting to discuss versioning or how we want to proceed with those things. I think those conversations happened, and I believe the authors will probably talk to that. Yeah. Okay. Great. Perfect. And then we have the privacy primer document and Mimi messages document that we accepted. I know Rowan was aspirationally going to upload something. I don't know if that happened, but I know he had a few things going on. So
Yeah. I didn't get to it. I'll get to it next week, but I can upload a new version that
okay.
is that uses the extension framework that was defined in the VCON draft.
Yeah, and maybe we can just validate that we're good on the extension mechanisms and things like that. Yeah. Sounds good. And there was a privacy primer update as well to make it a working group document. So I think that's sort of the current state. Just wanted to validate everybody was on the same page there. And we can continue discussing if there isn't any other questions. Great. All right, I think who wants to go first? Do we want to do overview first? Okay, Thomas. Do you want me to just click?
Thank you and good morning. My name is Thomas, and I am a conversational data enthusiast. So here is what I could do here for a little bit is go over the VCON overview document, the scope of it, some of the assertions it makes. If you haven't had a chance to read the overview, it's fantastic. if you're tired, if you need to get some sleep. First slide, please. So first is what is a VCON? And so the core concept of a VCON is it's a container for human real-time conversations. It's a little bit like a vCard, but instead of holding contacts, it holds the conversations. That's the reason we call it a VCON, a joke on the vCard. It supports multimedia, it supports any kind of session where a human being is involved, and where personal data needs to be protected. So it covers audio, video, messaging, chat. Um, uh, you know, I've done some text messaging work recently with VCON creations, which was really interesting because I hadn't considered, the existence of MMS and the personal data which could be held in a photo, but that came up, and email. So that's also a place where personal data needs to be protected. And the whole point behind a VCON is that you can interoperate between systems. That's why we're here at the IETF. We're pretty good at interoperation between systems. And the format's in the JSON format. That wasn't always so sure. We've also considered CBOR. We have landed on JSON for now. There has been a price that we've paid by doing JSON and not CBOR. Much harder to version a JSON than a CBOR, but the fact is most of the people who will be working with VCONs are application developers. And so for adoption reasons, we stuck with JSON. So what are the benefits of it? First of all, it's a common exchange mechanism. We haven't had this before. We haven't been able to take a conversation and put it between systems, to analyze it, to develop tools that use them. Because of the third-party tools that VCONs enable, they really help to enhance identity, privacy, and security efforts all around. And they simplify service integration by making it a more interoperable multi-vendor world, all good for end users. Next, please. Okay, so let's talk about the problems the VCON solves. First of all, the current challenges are that conversational data is siloed. I've come to start talking to people as if they're recreating AOL, or they've recreated AOL in the communication systems of our world. Every communication system itself is a little data silo, and the standardized format not having existed till now, which makes it really difficult to interoperate systems, especially after conversations are over. So if a conversation is over and you wish to have a multitude of ways of analyzing that conversation, it's difficult to interoperate these systems. And it also is difficult to enforce consistent data handling practices. Because every format would be different, it's difficult to enforce that across systems, especially if you are a data controller and it's your job to make sure data is handled properly. The vendors that you work with may not make that easy because of their different formats. And so the solution is to standardize the format to enable that data exchange between the systems. And this results in simplified regulatory compliance. All love and respect to one of my co-authors, Diana James, but there is a flourishing market in telecom lawyers and personal data lawyers because there's just so much gray. It's really hard to figure out what's what and why is why. The rules are hard to follow. But when you have a standardized container you can apply rules against, you have a much stronger platform by which you can know if you're in compliance or not. And of course, this is all the rage these days. It also gives us better conversation analytics and machine learning training, not only because the data going in is ordered and good, but because the tools that we have can be in multitude. Next. So what's inside of a VCON? There's actually 4 parts of a VCON. The first part of a VCON are the parties, the people who are involved in it. And as I said before, the idea of a VCON really is focusing in on when people are in conversations, although strictly it doesn't have to be people. I mean, you could put 2 bots in there if you really wanted to. That would work just fine. And the parties are identified by a number of ways: name, phone number, stir token, and now DID. Thank you, Dan. That was a great add to the core. I think that's a very, very nice one. Basically, if the question is you're protecting people's data, well, whose data are you protecting? The parties allow you to identify those authoritatively. The companion, and these are in multiplicity. You may have many parties as you want. You may have 1 party. And then the dialogues is the other side of that ledger. The actual conversations, the least surprising part of a VCON. You may have many dialogues as you want. Again, any sort of communication media type that I've named. Maybe it's easier for you to think about these as the ground truth, what actually happened. And these 2 ledgers are indexed with each other. They're both foreign keyed. So every party identifies. So every dialogue identifies which parties are in there. So you can. So for right to know requests, just simply, it's easy to say, what data do you have about me? Well, I know which dialogues you are in. And that's the facts of the matter. The other half of a VCON, I think, are the opinions. First is the analysis. And these are all the times and places where VCONs, your conversations has been analyzed. One part of your digital rights as a person is your right to know how your data was processed. This gives us the ability to express that and to record that. So things like transcription, summaries, and sentiment analysis are all good things to put into the analysis. And just like the analysis also identifies which dialogues were analyzed, again, to keep everything, all the referential integrity straight. Then finally, the attachments, which is the context of the conversation. And when we first started working on VCONs, we understood that context in the area of machine learning and AI was really important. So our first attachment was a lead, because I worked for a sales organization, and why do we call that person is an important thing to know when we're trying to analyze a conversation. But really, it's gotten to be a much larger idea. We're going to be talking about consent later on today. Consent is really critically important to the conversation. Why do you have it? How long can you hold it? What can you do with it? Very important piece of that conversation. That is also critical context. Next, please.
I think good. Dan, did you have a comment?
Yeah.
It's just one comment here. Dialogue here, you have audio, video, and text. In the draft that was submitted, you had added imagery, and I want to strongly object to adding imagery to dialogue, because the dialogue has very specific scope. It's a transcript or something that is transcribable. If we start putting pictures and of cows and pretty scenery, it's not, it's not expressible. And I'd like to be very strict about what we put in dialogue. Now, there are a few exceptions. We have like multi-part attachments to the dialogue when we have like a SMTP message or a MIME message or something like that. But in those contexts, it's obvious that those are attachments, right? And so imagery, I think this is an important distinction. Imagery is, for the most part, an attachment, and there are few exceptions to that. And so I really want to be careful, because otherwise we're going to have people misinterpreting, what goes in a dialogue, what goes in an attachment, and so I kind of really strongly object to imagery being added to something that is part of dialogue.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that position. Yogesh, want to add something to that?
Not specifically to this, but just an interesting thought. Maybe this is outside of VCON, so feel free to say it is outside. But you are doing a lot of analysis here, processed insight and derived data. And presumably, as you just mentioned, it could be mostly the ML model who is doing that.
Oh, say that again, please. I was a little quiet.
Presumably, that might be some kind of an ML model. Who
Yes,
would
that's
be
right.
doing-
Yes, very often. Yes.
Yeah. So, is there a framework in place to attach the details of the model which has done the analysis into your?
Yes, there is actually in the analysis section. There's an opaque body, but we have the ability to also indicate vendor and schema, and we do that to the schema ends up being the actual model itself, and we tend to keep the actual LLM calls as well. Thank you. Getting back to Dan's thing just for a quick second. So yeah, I appreciate that, and I don't disagree. The reason that it came to imagery was actually for a communications reason that I hadn't put up before. I'd mentioned MMS, SMS as you have, but also in a really weird VCON moment, we're working on faxing, and the fax artifacts very often contain personal information, very common in healthcare and hospitals in the set. And the output of a fax is typically PDFs or images. So it's a weird corner case, but that's what I was intending. So I don't say that you're wrong, but there are communications types that are represented by images. So maybe we could find some way of being more exact about it. But I agree with you.
Jonathan Lennox, I was just observing, to that point, the thing we're doing right now with the slides on the screen. Yes, you could represent it as a video, but actually, if you've uploaded the slides, what you're actually getting is a PDF, and it tells you what time each slide is shown. So representing that, say, as this image, as images might be a reasonable thing to do because it's probably more efficient. I would say probably the rule is if it's something that can be associated meaningfully with a time, saying this image happened at this time, then it's useful in a dialogue, and if not, yeah.
That's a really good point. I like that a lot. Thank you.
Just to go back on that, or push back on that, attachments have a timestamp, so they, and they are time marked, and so that's still there. I really want to stress that a dialogue ought to be dialogue, not a presentation, right? Presentation is not dialogue. It's a ancillary document. And I would also argue a fax is an attachment, right? It's just an attachment. Just like an SMS, you can't send images, but you can send an MMS, and that's an attachment, right?
And I just to be clear, I don't mean a fax which is adding to the context of the communication. I'm saying a fax which is the communication.
I really don't. I'd like to see dialogue being something that's transcribable and or is a transcript. I really think we need to stick to that definition.
I think, Dan, are you saying you're not opposed to including images? It's just the semantics.
It's where does it go in the VCON? That's very important. It's an attachment. It goes in the attachment, not the dialogue.
Maybe we could take this down to the list at some point.
I think
it's a good argument. I think we should work it through because I don't disagree with Dan. I don't.
Officially, we have 2 minutes. So
okay, great. Next,
keep going.
So the whole point behind a VCON is to address privacy and data responsibility. And that really is a balancing act between utility and sensitivity. So VCONs address privacy considerations and also privacy enablement features like data minimization, granular redaction, and right to know compliance. We've been working hard to make sure we measure these against regulatory compliance structures like GDPR, CCPA, and HIPAA. So these are things that which we're actively considering and measuring. Go ahead, next. And the real world use cases that we're looking at are 3: contact centers, healthcare messaging, and eCrit. All respect to Brian. I hope he likes what I did with eCrit. I'd love to hear his comments on that if he's out in the ether. But also, different sorts of messaging which are quite, sensitive, such as healthcare messaging. Next. Is that it?
I don't know. I'm having trouble here
Mhm.
for some reason. Sorry about that. Yogesh, do you while I fix my connection here?
So, because you are on the real world use cases slide, since
Yes.
it's quite a good variety of use cases covered here, I just wanted to ask you, is there an open source implementation or any kind of implementation in these areas where you would like to point to some GitHub links?
Yeah, there's actually I could argue two of the three have been implemented multiple times, and the one that has perhaps still in deployment is the healthcare messaging, which has been a very interesting use case actually, in that the biometrics which are being kept in those cases tend to be a little more more substantial than just because there are videos and there are a lot much more to
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right.
Okay, I think I got it back.
So from a technical architecture, it's a JSON-based structure. As I said before, we picked JSON because CBOR is, although technically better on the wire, it is not technically better for the application developers, which is where most of these VCONs live. So by making it a JSON, we're able to really interact well with the existing application providers. We have three security forms of the VCON. One is unsigned for internal and trusted environments. So that would cover interoperation between systems under one security boundary. We have a signed version, which allows us to do data integrity, really good for shipping it across a boundary, and encrypted when we want to have data protected at rest. Also, one of the interesting things about VCONs is that the dialogues can be of very different sizes. A text message is not the same size as a video, so that sometimes it's very difficult to take a VCON that's 9 gigs big and work with it. So in order to make good choices around that, we handle two guys of this, an inline content for smaller files, and to have one file that's interchanged for security, government, military reasons. Then finally, then external references for very large and very large files for operational reasons. And finally, when we have those external references, we can also sign the external hash, so we know that the media that we're referring to has not been tampered. Next. Okay, there's also coverage for relationships between VCONs. So the relationship type supported in the VCONs are grouping, which allows you to take these set of VCONs, have interrelationships. They are a group. Redaction is an ability to say this new VCON came from an old VCON, but has less information, and the original is in the new one, and appending. So we've actually made a VCON, but we want to add to it without changing the original. That allows us to put in new information that references to the old without challenging the integrity. Now, for version control, once a VCON is signed, it's immutable. It's the only kind of what do they call those things in blockchain that the artifacts that they were selling for $1 billion. Huh? NFT. Yeah, it's the only kind of NFT I want, right? Is a VCON, if you ask me. And so that allows us to have historical snapshots. And we have two approaches. We can have deep copy or incremental changes. If you want to have a new version, you can refer to the old one in whole or in part. And then we also have multi-entity collaboration. So if you think about the VCON itself from a data processing standpoint, the actual attachments, the analyses come from other systems in your ecosystem, and that allows you to have a cross-boundary trust sharing that includes other systems that have built that VCON. Next, please. Okay, so last slide here. Why are we doing this? Well, I think we've talked a lot about why it's good for people, for data protection. We do work for the end users here at at the IETF, but there's also key benefits for organizations. First of all, there's a lot of operational benefits to it. The unified communication across channels is a big problem. My small company is not very big. We have 200 people in it, but we still have 5 communication systems, and those guys don't talk with each other. So it also allows us to have a lot better analytics, but more so, much more automated and strong compliance and audit trails. We'll be talking about that in the consent in a bit. From a technical perspective, it's much easier to work with. It's a nice input for whatever robot we're using. And finally, from the business value of it, this really helps us to understand the customer journey as they go across systems. Maybe they start with a web page that has them text us, and maybe that goes to a call. This allows us to really have a much better view of the customer as in their journey, and to reduce, our risk of how we're managing our conversations as it relates to what might happen tomorrow. So that's the VCON overview.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Any comments or questions? I think it's good to sort of baseline this overview and make sure the working group's on the same page about what we're working on and what should be there, what shouldn't be there, use cases that are important. There's already been a bunch of discussion, but let's just make sure that new participants are all aware of those things. It's good to go with the overview, but maybe going towards the next iteration should be discussion on the list about those types of topics and see if we can settle on the overview.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan? Core first.
Hi, I'm Dan Petrie, and I'm going to talk about the VCON, the JSON schema VCON core, basically. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about, just briefly, because we've already talked about it, but how the documents were split up. I'm going to talk about changes between the, the JSON schema from the container version to this version of the document. We had a name change, but there was content change too. And then the two big issues that were kind of open from the last meeting were versioning and extensions, and then how we do appended. And so I'm going to talk about that. I hope I have a solution or a resolution for those two that people will be on board with. And then I'll do a little update on, we had a VCON interrupt, and I'll talk about it, and we had hackathon earlier this week, and there's some other open issues and stuff to do. So next slide. So we had this container document, and it wasn't, we talked about splitting it up at the last meeting in Bangkok, and it wasn't clear to me whether, all of those would be work group items or whether we would start out, with some of them as individual. And so we had a discussion with the chairs, and the chairs had suggested that they were all work group items, and so they're named appropriately. I just want to bring that up. If anybody had, we had also discussed that we should make sure everyone's on board with that, and then so that's what I'm doing now. Anybody object to all three of these documents being work group items? And so now's the time to to object. Okay.
Yeah, I think we've already accepted them, so they're good. Okay. I did forget to bring up. I don't want to go on a rat hole about this, but whether or not we should have one VCON or two VCONs in the names. I don't know if that's a major issue or a minor issue, but okay. Let's not. Maybe if we have time at the end, we can discuss it, or or we can talk about it on the list.
All right. All right. Next slide. So here I'm going to go through some changes. Some of these things I have slides for, so which are probably the things that people are interested in exploring more. But so as I said, the introduction and overview are split to one document. The contact centers, some of the contact center specific parameters that were defined from Jonathan's CC. Use cases document. Some of those were split out into an extension. I'll talk about the extension mechanism and some maybe controversial. I didn't split everything out because I thought some things were relevant to the core, and there were a few things I was on the fence. I'll talk about those in a minute. I added the SIP URL to the party object. Nobody brought that up. I was about to implement a VCON interface for a soft client, and I realized I didn't have a place to put the SIP URL. So I added that from my own initiation. I just want to bring that up. Anybody object to that? Okay. Tom had put a PR in for the W3C decentralized ID. I added that in. Again, just want to make sure nobody objects to that. This is going to be part of both of these are going to be part of the core. At the last work group meeting, we talked about session ID, and that I think that everybody, no one objected to adding a SIP session ID, end-to-end session ID to the dialogue, and so that was added in. Previously, I had moved to the different format for the content hash, and that was done in the prior version, but I did some more cleaning up and consolidation. I defined a JSON content hash type because that's used several places, and just consolidated and reduced some redundancy. As previously discussed, I removed the inline VCONs for redacted group and appended objects. Let's see, added some clarification. Rowan had brought up that, can a signed or encrypted VCON, can the content be gzipped first? And I think there's no reason that it can't. And so I added some text to explicitly talk about that. And then I appended it as deep copy, and I got a slide about that, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Added a whole bunch of stuff to the IANA section for registering the schema parameter names and objects and things like that in the IANA section. So that was added, and then there were two parameters. I don't know what I was thinking. I added two parameters in the dialog object that had hyphens instead of underscores. Everywhere else I used underscores. I don't know what I was thinking that day, but when I added that, but for some reason I didn't notice that for several iterations of the document, but I noticed it when I was building the IANA registry. So I changed those names. It's another and I added a section, in the upward incompatibility section or migration section of those name changes. And then I added a section on extensions, which again I have a slide that I'll talk about extensions and versioning and things like that in a follow-on slide. So before I go on, any questions? Okay, next slide. So Jonathan had written up this wonderful use case with defining a set of parameters and things like that that were relevant for contact center cases. And I had created a, at the bottom here, there's a link into the repo for the ID where I could create a table of all these parameters and had mapped it out of things that had already existed in the draft and things that needed to be added, and what the name of the parameters that were added and all that kind of stuff. When I split the contact center specific parameters out into an extension, I added another column to that table. I couldn't get that formatted into the slide because it was in Markdown and I couldn't get it in here. So I apologize. I've got a very terse slide here, but if you want more details, that slide is a great place to look, and it shows whether I put it in the core or whether I put it in the contact center extension. And it talks about the names and all that kind of stuff. There were 3 parameters that I just wanted to confirm. I thought that they should be part of core, but I was kind of on the fence and wasn't confident. And so I thought I'd bring them up here. Dialog object application, and then this is the parameter that says, what application did this VCON come from? You know, was it Google Meet, or was it Zoom, or, you know, something like that? And then the dialogue object disposition, it was, you know, kind of like the outcome or summary or whatever of the conversation or the result, you know, or did it succeed, that kind of thing. I felt those two were kind of core-ish and were useful outside of a contact center. So I left them in the core. I'd be happy to discuss doing otherwise, you know, pushing them into the contact center extension. Love feedback if people don't agree that they should be part of the core. And then we had Jonathan's draft also defined the concept of a UUID for the party, for the participant. And I just, it seemed like UUID and the DID are kind of similar things. Do we want to name them differently, or we want to use the same parameter for both of them? Are they mutually exclusive? I don't know. I don't know enough about the uses of those two things. Say, you know, should we consolidate, or is it okay to have two different names for these kind of similar things?
Rohan?
Rowan May. In my experience, DID has been typically used in the context of credentials or like authentication or identification of something that could be authenticated, and a UUID is much more generic.
Okay.
So if I would keep them separate, and
Okay.
Yeah.
I had no opinion on this. It just occurred to me when I was, you know, going through here, looking at changes. Like, it's a little similar. Is that, should that be discussed? So sounds like no objections to leaving those parameters in core. I will leave that as and continue. Next slide, please. Versioning. So at the last meeting, Ori stood up as an individual and had a very strong objection to having a schema version, and more specifically a semantic version. And he had recommended I talk to Mike Jones. I think Andy stood up too, and he kind of objected to the semantic version. I wasn't sure if it was versioning in general, but we did manage to get Ori and Mike Jones, and then Chris and Tom joined in. And we got them all in the same place at the hackathon, and to go through this. And I think the kind of the result was that versions are bad unless they're mutually exclusive. And so I think it was recommended that we use this extension mechanism as our versioning mechanism. And so my takeaway, or how I interpret that, and just speaking this out loud just to confirm everybody's on board with that, is we're going to get rid of the version. It's called the VCON parameter currently in the top level, but we're going to deprecate that. I'm going to keep it in there for the life of the ID, with a portion of that to be removed by the RFC editor. But and then what will remain in there is a statement about how the VCON version is deprecated, and so the extension mechanism is the means by which we make changes then to the schema. And I've got text in there now in the current version here that it describes how to create an extension, that an extension can add or remove parameters or objects, from the schema, and there's kind of this classification of two types of extensions: a compatible and an incompatible one. And these concepts are defined in there, and that so with an incompatible one would be one where it makes the changes that a naive implementation wouldn't work properly, without explicitly supporting that extension. And so we have this new parameter called extensions that lists the extensions that have been applied to this specific VCON. And I had to define this concept of a or a parameter called must support, whereas, an application that wouldn't work properly without explicitly supporting this extension, it should basically not, choose not to do something with this VCON because it is not aware enough to be able to use that VCON. Mike Jones had also talked about this kind of concept, and I think there's a precedent for, or he had said there's a precedent for calling this critical. So any extensions that are applied to the specific VCON, that it's critical that the application explicitly understand these extensions. Then we put it in this. We list those extensions in the critical field or parameter in the VCON. So that's the proposal going forward. Jonathan, you had mentioned, and I apologize, you had referenced QLog, and I didn't get a chance to look at that, but I would love your input, or either today or follow on, relative to what was done in QLog to this mechanism.
Yeah. But I was actually going to, Jonathan, I was actually going to be, I think I'm a little concerned that critical is too coarse in some cases, and maybe this is just an application thing, but like I could see that, if you have an extension that, if you have an application that, like, say, wants to transcribe audio, maybe not understanding some fields might not matter, but if you have an extension that's trying to redact personally identifiable information and you don't know some of the fields, that's much more of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what's critical depends on what you're doing.
Mm.
So I think it might just be that if you're in the business of redacting information, you have to understand everything, or say I don't understand it. But I think that the exact semantics of critical might be a little more complicated than that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's an excellent point. That certain perspectives you kind of need, must support all of the extensions. But I think where the critical is you're actually breaking the schema in some way, right? That would cause a prior implementation to not be able to operate properly at all. So, but yes, I will. I'll make a note here that I need to clarify that a little more detail, that the context is important. Or the application or perspective is important when looking at extensions versus critical.
Yeah, I think you haven't had the opportunity to include it in the document, so once we can look at the text, we can.
Oh, it's in there now.
You created an update?
Yeah, no, it went in this version. I added the definition, the concept, and I called it must support. Mike had made a suggestion that it should be called critical. So I'm going to change the parameter name, but the concept and the document is all right. I mean, it may need more detail. I'm not saying it's done, but there's something in there now.
I did want to clarify on the version thing. I don't think we should wait till RFC editor. We want what goes to the RFC editor, the opinion of the working group. So if we want to deprecate version, we should make that decision and just do it.
Oh, I mean, I will put in the next iteration, I will document it as deprecated, but we need to have a version number through the life of the internet drafts, just so that people can migrate the existing versions that are out there, and then it'll go away. It won't. It'll go away, when we get to RFC or last call or somewhere in there.
Okay. Well, or we make it optional somehow or something, like, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to remove it after a certain period of time, I don't think. But
well, it's necessary for migration of existing stuff, right?
I understand that.
And because we didn't have extensions for the prior versions, right? And so we're kind of stuck with that, and so it's kind of historical.
I'd say that once we're confident the draft isn't going to change anymore, then we should remove it. So it sounds like I would say probably after working group last call and before PubRec is probably do a revision that peruse it would be probably the best time I would suggest.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Anything else before next issue? Next slide. Appended. So this is one that brought up, I think, for many meetings, group meetings here, and it was kind of like the idea of the appended is a way to create a newer version when you've got like a signed version, or you don't want to modify the prior version. And so there were kind of two ways to do this. You could either do a deep copy and duplicate a lot of data, or do some kind of incremental incremental adding of additional data and referencing the original to be kind of layered on top. I brought it up at the last meeting. Can we decide on one of them? And it seemed like the group wanted both. And so, and there was also a request for to write up the use case scenarios, and I did that. That's in the overview document. There's a section on appended, and basically, I think what I summarized it down is this conflicting requirements of data size versus data normalization and ease of use, right? And when you have these kind of incremental changes, you can't use it like a regular VCON, and so you have to do something first, or you have to look in two places for things, or it's kind of awkward. And so this is kind of here's a plan that I came up with. I hope people are on board with it. So what I did is next slide is I documented appended as a deep copy, and that we can define a patched for incremental copying if people want the differential instead of a full copy of that. And next slide, I'm going to go through each of those, what kind of means, and then we can have some discussion on that order. So the appended object, refers to the prior version of the VCON, either through the UUID, or it can also include a URL. And then the VCON that is referencing the prior version is a full copy of the prior version plus any changes, modifications, whatever. And so that's what I would like to define appended as. And we can argue whether maybe that's not the right name. Maybe we should be amended or updated or whatever. We'll come back to that in a minute. My thought is the appended. It is currently included in the core, and it is defined as this. And my thought is, that should be part of the core. Next slide. And then we can define a patched object, which again refers to the prior version, contains a list of incremental changes reference to the to that prior version. And we can use something like JSON patch, JSON merge, JSON path, JQ, whatever to be discussed. Some mechanism for describing the incremental changes, and so that you don't have these. You don't have a full copy or duplicated data and things like that. And the interesting thing that this was part of the use cases that it identified is one of the things we want to do is identify the VCON in different points of life in its life cycle. And so this patch object could have this list of patches in it, and they can be labeled for specific stages of life in the VCON. And so there are there's code out there that does that implements these the JSON patch, RFC 6902, and then there's also, I think, for the JSON merge as well, but I think it's more support for the latter. But again, I'm not here to kind of discuss the solution. What I'd like to propose is this patch object be defined in an extension in a future point in time, and let's move forward and use. We have appended, define that, get this this document done, and we can add patched down the road a little bit. I would love people okay with that plan.
Hi, it's Thomas. Yeah, I think it's a fruitful thing to dive into. I think we're going to have to support this. You know, this amendment is it clearly in a
Absolutely.
yeah, I think it's
I
right.
think it's important. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying let's
Yeah.
get something done, and this is an easy patch to add.
Yeah.
Patch.
Yeah, right,
Extension.
right.
No pun
Extension
Yeah,
to
right.
add.
Yeah, no, I support the direction.
Okay. Any other comments? And if you could back up one slide, the one kind of open issue, because I think I've heard comments about, you know, is this really appended? You know, I just want to discuss the name, the parameter name. Are we okay with appended? Do we want amended, updated? Those seem like the top three for me. I'm open to other suggestions, but I just want us to agree on the name, so we don't have further discussion on this.
So just a thought. So we have reducted, appended, and now we potentially adding another field. I'm just wondering if we could capture and generalize this more as some kind of transformation,
Mm-hmm.
and then have types of transformations, and kind of take a cue out of like how we can create lineage, like, you know, other tools like Open Lineage does this, where you have basically your object, then some kind of transformation that connects it to the next state of that object, and then you can, you know, create graphs out of this too. So just a thought.
Yeah, there, you know, certainly there's an abstraction there. I think patched is a different animal. I feel like that's, you know, even though it is, you know, conceptually the same kind of thing, and you know, appended and redacted are similar in the sense that you're basically referencing a prior version. They're, I think, potentially treated significantly different, and so I don't know. I don't have a strong aversion to that, but I kind of feel like they are different things. But go ahead, Rowan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole concept of, you know, doing a deep copy versus just having a patch, this is a little bit fraught, but that regardless of which one you're doing, the fact that you can do operations which replace something, for me, this means this is not an appended thing, that it has a much more strong semantics of amended. And because amended can mean, you know, you add, you remove, you delete, you update, any of those things. But if the thing that you're looking for is what's the name for a thing that's got a deep copy, and how is that different from something that's just here's a patch that goes on top, that's a different question than what the parameter name is, in my opinion.
So I'm not clear where to go with that.
I mean, if you just want to say like, hey, here's a thing which amends the previous thing, it's called amended.
Okay.
I think that's fine. But the whole idea of, you know, if you ever want to have, this is a deep copy versus this is a patch, then you need to have two different things.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could, you know, either whether that's like, here's a patch, or here is a completely amended, you know, replaced version. Those are two different semantics, and just make sure you keep them separate.
Okay, so you're arguing for two different objects, an amended object and a patched object. You know, two different.
And hopefully, you only use one at a time.
And it sounds like you had a preference that instead of appended, we call it amended. Yes. Did I?
Yeah.
I'm on board with that. Anybody want to second that?
Just my 2 cents. I like amended. It implies
Okay.
more adding and deleting versus appended, which implies only adding.
Yeah. No, I was troubled with the name as well. So for that reason, because maybe you update a transcript because there was errors in it or something like that, right? And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to leave the amended object in the core. I'm going to change it to amended instead of appended. And patched, we will define in a follow-on ID. Maybe when this gets into workgroup last call or something like that, I will get that started or whatever. But I don't think we need any more workgroup documents at this point in time to look at, because I think we aren't getting a lot of eyeballs as it is. Next slide. Actually, next 2 slides. One more. VCON interop. We held, thanks to initiation by Jeff Pulver and Tom, we had a first VCON interop in April in Hyannis, and there were 9 different implementations. I think it was pretty cool. I wrote up a bunch of test cases for people to be able to work, both on-site and remotely. And I think maybe we didn't get as much done as we would have liked to, but I think it was a great first start, and we learned some things, and we're certainly planning on having more of them. A few things, outcomes that I learned anyway, and heard from others is I ran into a VCON that the dialog object didn't have an encoding parameter, and that really messed things up. So it took me a while to debug and figure out what the issue was. So my plan is I'm going to, you could imply based upon the media types for the object that what the encoding should be, and I think I'm going to add some text to the draft that though encoding is required and must be, I can't remember if it's must or should, but I would encourage implementations to be tolerant if it is absent, and that they can look at the media types to be tolerant of that absence of that. So I thought I would add that. We had another case where somebody didn't understand the idea of UUID, or that it was required, and had a request for some test cases for call transfer situations, things like that. So it was update from interop. We're gonna get another one on the books here. I just haven't gotten my act together to do that. So next slide. Update from the hackathon here. How's my time?
I don't know. We need.
I'm okay.
Don't dilly-dally.
All right, sorry. From the hackathon, we did hit several people working on several different things. It was some people working on updating from the last ID. There were some changes there. There was this discussion. I talked about this discussion we had with Mike Jones and Ori Steele at the hackathon to kind of work out the versioning and extension stuff. We had a Go implementation that someone was working on, and there was some interop testing, and I personally worked on the appended implementation, and I was working it with workflows and dealing with signed VCONs and things like that. And so I had fully implemented that and in some workflow kind of situations, and did some testing on that. So I'm pretty happy with appended, other than the name, which I will change. So I think that one is I think baked enough. Next slide. Was that my last slide? Oh. Open issues. Appended, we talked about that. I think we solved that. Versioning extensions, I think we solved that. VCON URI. Steve last year had asked for a VCON URI, and he was supposed to give a patch for the text of what it is, why we need it, and how it's used. I didn't get that. Somebody wants to send that to me. I'm happy to figure out the IANA section for that, but I need some text because I don't know. I don't understand how it's used and what it's for. Hey, to follow on, I think Andy, you'd suggested I send email to the media type email list, and I did that. I got crickets. I sent another one, and I copied you, Andy. Maybe you can. Oh, did they? Okay, awesome. I just did that. Did a redo of that yesterday. So we got a response. Awesome. I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to look at that. So,
Jonathan, I mean, I would push back on the concept of a VCON URI because this is a document format, and document formats don't have URIs.
Right.
Where to find them has URIs.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
and where to find them would be an HTTPS URI or whatever. So
okay.
Yeah. So,
all right. So unless somebody comes up with
I need to have a good reason why this should have a URI for something that's a document.
Okay. I'm going to drop it unless somebody comes up with an argument of why we should have that and provide some text. So that's going to go away as far as I'm concerned. That's it. There's a bunch of to-dos in that are mostly like edits or, I need someone to review sections and things like that. But so that's some open issues, whatever.
So there might still be value to get a media type, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You already have that?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Yeah, no. What the email that I'd sent to the media type is, I have an INS section. Did I do this right? Do I need,
I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
It wasn't clear to me whether I need 2 or 3 media types. And so that's what was posted to that list to get some feedback on that. And hopefully they've answered my question. I didn't forget it. I just said it on the next slide. Sorry. So I think I talked about, mostly of this. Still looking for an eCrit. Is Brian there?
No, it doesn't look like you could join today.
Yeah. Oh, and there's a few examples missing. Actually, at Hackathon, I created as part of implementing the appended, I constructed a appended signed example for the ID. That's actually already committed and is there. So next talk. This should be quick.
Yeah.
So I created our first VCON extension. Well, actually, it's probably a lie. Rowan created the first one. We didn't formally know it as that. Yeah. But so next slide. So this is an extension to the VCON schema for contact center specific parameters. And so I split that out of the prior document and into the specific CC extensions ID. I added IANA registries for the new parameters that it's proposing. I defined the extension and the name, and per it is described in the core document. So those were changes that made. Next slide. Back to again, I have this table that I created with all the parameters that Jonathan defined in the CC use cases, and how they mapped onto the either existing stuff or new stuff that was proposed. Is the same reference to that table. Next slide. I couldn't get the table to format into here, so I did the lazy thing and I just listed the names of them. So these are the parameters that were in the CC use cases that I kept in core. They were, some of these already predated the CC use cases. Some of these were initiated or created as a result of the CC use cases. But I felt all of these were core things, like the concept of parties, coming and going in a conference. That's very useful and outside of the call center, and knowing and the concept of whether the call was transfer and the relationship between those potentially 3 different calls in a transfer situation. I think that was independent of contact center and useful. So those things were I kept in core and didn't pull out into the extension. Next slide. So what I ended up with is these parameters so there were 4 parameters added to the dialog object and 2 parameters added to the party object. You can look at those at your leisure. Next slide. I still need to do. This is my bad. This is not Jonathan. I need to ask Jonathan for some enum values for the interaction type and I need to get his markdown to include that in an appendix, because that was what was recommended a couple meetings ago. I just haven't done that yet, but I think with all the editing and chopping of documents, it's easier that it wasn't added in yet. So, and then there's a few to-dos, I think, marked in the internet draft that I need to resolve. So I guess, people, I would love to confirm people are okay that we create this contact center extension, and want to know if there's any objection with how I drew the line of what should go here in the core or versus the extension. So any comments? People are okay with it as it is? All right.
I think we were okay with creating the document, but we should definitely pay attention to defining extension, and especially if we have two documents that are extensions, and we want to make sure that those mechanics are all
The extension mechanism.
Right.
Yeah. No, I would definitely like to, Jonathan, you mentioned the keylog stuff. If you could review the extension mechanism relative to that, if you're already familiar with the keylog, I didn't give it a chance to chase down that, but if you could, review the extension mechanism, I would love your input and feedback.
Yeah, I'd say, I think the main difference is how you name them. You just have simple strings, which is fine if you're actually expecting everybody who does a proprietary extension to register them. If you're not, the way the QLog one works, I believe, is it's URIs, and so it's a URN for IANA one, but if you want to do a proprietary one, you could just do like a URL based on your own domain. So that might be cleaner for proprietary extensions, but it's not strictly speaking necessary. So
yeah, the discussion we had was to use names. It was more like Jose type names.
Okay, then if there's, especially if there's precedent for that, that's fine.
Yeah. I'm not saying it has to be that way, but that was the previous discussion.
Okay. I don't have anything else. Anybody?
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Sure.
Do you, I think, so you have some slides. Did you upload them? Okay. Yeah. Give me a sec. All right. Which one's next? Consent, right? Consent?
Mm-hmm. Consent. Yes, I consent. I consent to you uploading these. All right. So again, my name is Thomas McCarthy Howe. I'm here to talk about a new draft that was authored by myself and Steve Lasker to define a standardized attachment to define and carry consent as it applies to a VCON. Next, please. So this is just as a quick preface. One of the things that we had decided early on in the VCON working group was not to spend a lot of our time defining a lot of standard attachments and analyses type because they're infinite. I believe Jonathan's recommendation to us was don't spend a lot of time in the protocol inside the protocol, right? Which I thought was really smart. But there are a few things here that really beg for standardization. And this is the first of them. We think there's probably two or three. Other examples might be transcriptions. Another might be validity. But this one is a necessary. So what the challenge is that the conversations contain a lot of dangerous data. And so it's why we do that. And that dangerous data requires proper consent management. And just because you've put that data inside a document doesn't mean that you've relinquished your responsibility to it. Now, the current gap is there's no standardized mechanism for recording and verifying consent in a conversation container. So this because we don't have one, we aren't able to make third-party tools that validates it and works around it. And that existence today has given us a lot of struggles with privacy compliance, especially around communications data. So the solution that we're recommending today is a standardized VCON attachment that would provide structured consent and be able to enable structured consent management within the VCONs. Next, please. So how does it work? So it's an attachment like any other VCON attachment. It goes in the attachment section of the VCON. It has 4 required fields and 4 optional enhancements. And so the required fields are simply like expiration, which is a very dull sledgehammer approach at saying this consent that is addressed by this attachment expires on this timestamp. Now RFC 3339 defined. It identifies the party that the attachment is related, the consent is related to. This is the consenting party. In data speak, this is the data subject generally. The dialogue, which is the actual piece of information that is being consented to. So the combination of parties and dialogues with the consent attachment allows you to have a complete coverage of what's being consented to, multi-party for the entirety of the VCON, and finally consents, which is an array of specific permissions granted. So for those of you who had been in the communications, before, you're in the IETF, of course you have. We have primarily been considering communications consent. This is a larger idea, the communications consent. This is a larger idea in terms of consent for purpose. So consent for training, or consent for quality assurance, or consent for AI, or consent for text and data mining, in addition to the consents for communications. And the array is simply an ordered array of a consent type and a status. I have consented true, I have consented false. Now, there's some optional enhancements that go along with this attachment. The first is a reference to the terms of service. So this is an opportunity to, either through URL or direct inclusion, to carry with the VCON itself, with the attachment, the terms of service, which attends this particular claim of consent. The second thing is status monitoring intervals, which are programmable per sensitivity. So this indicates to the holder of the VCON how often they need to check for the consent withdrawals that may occur in a scene. The third is a SCIT consent ledger integration, and I've had some really good feedback on this one. So again, Steve Lasker and I were the authors of this draft. Steve is being very, very active in the SCIT working group. So this was the consent ledger is where you can go to check to see where consent updates are made, and to indicate where perhaps life cycle things for this consent should be recorded. Now, this might be better off not just being SCIT, but other sorts of distributed ledgers. So that's one of the requests that we've had, which I think is pretty reasonable. And then finally, a list of cryptographic proof objects that attend those consent ledgers. So if you have consent ledger proof objects that have been previously entered, this is the place for that to be. Dan, do you have a question? Whenever it's appropriate, I have a list. You have a list, okay. All right, so then one quick thing before we move off of this, I did reference the AI preferences working groups work. They are working on a vocabulary of consent types for AI processing, including things like general AI, generative AI, and text and data mining. So these are good examples of proof of consents for purpose. And so that is also referenced here. And the idea is that the consents in the array will support those vocabularies that are being done by the AI prefs group. Next. And finally, some advanced capabilities that are exposed here. So in 3 categories: temporal management, there's configurable expiration handling, again, based upon the sensitivity of the data. That way you're able to manage your data processing appropriately. We've also accounted for a clock skew as it might apply to expiration, and the rate at which you have to check for consent changes. The second list is consent ledger integration, as I said. The SCIT transparency service we think is really important for enabling of auditing and governance. We understand that, again, SCIT is a new protocol, so there may be a time for us to have other things there. And finally, it's very granular control. So this allows us to manage, purpose-based permissions. So it's not yes or no, it's consent for purpose. So that's the basis of the consent attachment. The draft is in the working group. I'd love to, if you have a chance to read that and comment on that, it'd be really good. So, and that's a good time to talk.
So this is Dan Petrie. I am not sure why you are proposing this as an attachment as opposed to an extension to the VCON, because you're kind of creating a schema extension. You're creating this schema that references dialogue and parties and things, and putting it in as a attachment as opposed to. I mean, this is. It's in essence a schema extension outside the scope of the schema.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, I take that as a place to think about it. Yeah, I remember we've been doing this work for about 6 months now, so I think it was outside of the extensions facility, and I certainly consider doing that. I'm not entirely sure that because it's another table that goes between abstractly between 2 different things. I'm not sure the extension mechanism would work, but I'd love to look at that. I'm not opposed.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to see like a consent object in the VCON that contains this kind of stuff.
Can it all be expressed as JSON? If
Yes.
it can, then probably extension does make sense.
And then you'd already mentioned. I would like to see the consent solution sans SCIT. It really this requires that you use SCIT, and I'd love to see those as 2 different proposals. A proposal of here's how we do consent with VCON, here's how you do VCON consent with SCIT. Right.
Yeah.
Those are kind of 2 different things. I'd like to see those separated, and where the consent extension or proposal or whatever that makes no mention of SCIT, COSI, CBOR, which the group has already expressed an aversion to. Right. And
can I ask a clarifying question about that, Dan?
Yeah.
Is it that you don't want you object to the fact there's a transparency ledger, or that the language that we use to interact with the transparency ledger is SCIT?
Well, it's specific. It requires SCIT. I mean, there are other. Not everybody's going to use SCIT. You don't have to use SCIT to do consent, right?
Correct. Yes.
You don't even have a transparency ledger. You can have some other mechanism database where you manage your consent through in your contact center through some other mechanism that maybe even pre-exists, VCON and SCIT.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would like to see that is separated, and church and state there. So I mean that I just feel that consent is independent of SCIT, right?
Yeah. There's the actual syntax of the attachment has a URL which indicates it's a SCIT URL. I would have no objections to having that be a generic URL of where the consent is held. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't be a problem with me. That'd be okay.
Right. The draft talks a lot about mechanism for how to register and revoke consent doesn't say anything of what I should do if consent is revoked, right? What does that mean to the VCON? Do I invalidate the whole thing? Do I delete everything that specific party said? Do I, right now? So, I mean, we have to have a policy here, or this is useless, right? We don't know what to do with it, right? So
I agree with that. I think the actual policy and the mechanisms, the verbs, as it were, that are with the consent are described in the VCON lifecycle draft. And that's why I feel like they both have to be addressed, because if you just think about as you just said, the VCON itself is a static piece of data, right? It doesn't imply any business logic around it. Yeah, if we want to have interoperable consent across the network, we'd have to address that, and that's what's in the VCON lifecycle document.
Okay, I haven't seen that yet. Did that get submitted?
It's been submitted, yeah, but you haven't had enough time to read it, so I don't think it's fair to.
So then, I mean, there's no reference in this document to the lifecycle, right? I mean, if the policy by which you revoke and what you're supposed to do with the loss of consent is in the lifecycle, then we ought to have
a pointer to that
reference to that, and that the policy is defined over there.
Yep.
The other thing, I felt that the cardinality and the linking wasn't quite right. I think that you have situations where consent is specific to a party and a dialogue, but you may have multiple dialogues for that specific party. And so I think the dialogue probably should reference the consent object as opposed to the consent object referencing the dialogue. Because you have cases where you've got a conference and a party talks for a sentence, and you've got a segment of dialogue that's just recorded just when they're talking, and then 5 minutes later that party talks again. You've got another segment, and you can have a separate dialogue. There's the same consent for both of those dialogues, right? And so I would do the referencing in the opposite direction as opposed to the consent referencing the dialogue.
For that particular point, the data model breaks down, though. I mean, the fundamental of this is I'm a person, I have a consent which I have provided. I may provide many consents over many dialogues. And so if I were to go backwards, I would have a referential issue. Because it is not the dialogue which is consenting, it is the dialogue to which my consent has been given.
Right. It's the dialogue that's referencing the consent relative to that dialogue, right? And
it's the consent attachment identifies the party and the dialogue to which that party is consenting.
But there may be multiple dialogues.
Absolutely right.
It's really
and there may be
one dialogue,
consents.
but it got segmented for some
There could literally be thousands of consents for a single dialogue. A dialogue may hold the personal information of many people.
Yes, absolutely. But for a specific person, there's one consent. Right?
Correct.
Right.
For that dialogue, there's only one. There's a one-to-one, even though that person may be having many different consents for purpose.
But that consent applies to multiple dialogues. It's the same consent. It's not a separate consent.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That the consent that you may have one consent by a person over multiple dialogues.
Correct.
Oh, okay, that's correct. Yes, no, you're right.
So because as I said, the example I used is you've got a conference and you're only recording when someone speaks.
Correct.
So I come up, I speak for 2 minutes. I sit down. I come back 5 minutes later. I speak for another 2 minutes. That may result in, depending on how you're doing your recording, it could result in 2 different dialogues that are really part of the same call, conversation, whatever.
Yes, that's right.
Conference. And so they have the same consent.
Yes, correct.
Right.
Yes. Yes. So I think in that case, I would extend the consent attachment to include multiple dialogues, multiple foreign keys, not just one.
Right. And then is there some implied consent for that party for other dialogues within that conversation? Let's say we have an email thread and we have a phone call. Is there some implication that for that party for those 2 different?
No,
those are separate.
No, they're separate.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Dan. Great comments. Appreciate that.
Hi. Thank you
Dan.
for this. Thank you for this work. There's lots of Daniels here.
Thank you.
I am struggling with the granularity of the consent here. I understand why we want to have it, but I also struggle generally with the legal fiction of consent. So if I'm having a discussion with you about, let's say, about someone who's not in the room, and I share that person's mailing address, which we might agree is some sort of sensitive information, that person is not a participant in the dialogue, and yet we don't have their consent.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're processing a dialogue, you want to be sent, as you said, dialogues can contain sensitive information. And I see no way for you to indicate that the person whose address I mentioned has consented, since we're looking at an index of the participants in the dialogue. And the person whose address I mentioned is not in the participants list. So what I worry here is that what you're building is a system where someone can exhaustively say, we got consent from all participants, therefore we can process this data, even though the sensitive data that's being discussed does not belong to any of the participants.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And I think that what you're driving towards here will be an automated system that does the, do we have the exhaustive check? Yes, we do. But then that actually doesn't cover what the legal requirements are, which is, do we have consent from people whose data is present in the dialogue? And I think we're going to get a mismatch there, and people will go ahead and process stuff that they don't have the legal right to process as a result.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Thank you, Dan. So there's a couple things I want to say in response. So first of all, these are expressions of consent that have proofs. This is not a system by which you can prove negative. You can't do it here either. The idea here is to record the consent that was given and relate it to the data to which it was given. Now that consent itself may not have been needed, right? So VCONs go very far in the world. It could be in places where, lawful purpose does not contain consent, right? It could be lawful purpose for all kinds of reasons where consent is not required. When you have a consent which has been given, I would say it's a critical part of the conversation as it's interchanged between systems that the consent that was given is also travels with the data. It might be a unsolvable problem to be able to say that we don't know what kinds of other consent should have been gained for this. It's not really the point. The point is to say, for this person gave his consent for that thing to do this. And it's so that's really much more of the opinion here. And I'm not sure if I said this, but there are places for proofs for the consent given. So examples of proofs are, you can point to dialogue which gives the consent. You can point to external resources where consent is also held. So this is really meant to carry the consent which exists, not to determine the consent that we don't know about. Does that make sense?
It does, but perhaps what that means is that we need to have some text in here that pointedly calls out that the presence of consent for all parties does not mean that the purpose is necessarily legitimate.
Correct.
Right?
Yes, absolutely.
The lack of exhaustiveness of this needs to be identified so that we don't get someone who claims, oh, well, we got consent from all parties, therefore it's okay. But I do want to flag that if the exhaustive consent of all parties is not present and that is still insufficient for doing the processing, I do have to wonder, why are we gathering this? Because as I understand it, the reason to gather the consents is for people who have legal obligations to be able to tell whether or not they have the right to operate on this data. And if what we're saying is this does not fulfill that purpose, because it cannot fulfill that purpose, because there are things that there may be things that come up in the dialogue that aren't present, that I have to wonder, what's the purpose of this mechanism?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's I guess a fundamental, just to keep that train going for a quick second. which is without the actual definition of the conversation and the definition of what consent you are giving, you can't tell whether or not that it's lawful, right? There's not enough context for you to make that judgment. The point behind the VCON is to provide a target for that sort of analysis to derive that answer. And so as that mechanism, this is what the intent is. And one other thing, and maybe this is also important to put into the document, and I'd be interested to hear what you said about it. So these are systems that are consent-based systems. These aren't systems that are designed such that we're dealing with conversations that don't have consent, right? So this is a permission system. This is meant to be within within the authority of the person who's carrying them, to allow that authority, that data controller, to really to protect the data rights of the people he's recorded. I would actually, my biggest worry is that we're doing this today without any of this. That we have just some tremendous personal data violations which are happening every day, because we don't seek consent, we don't seek to record it, we don't seek to relate it to the data that has been consented to, we don't provide systems to allow data subjects to know what they've consented to or to withdraw it. So this is the point behind what we're doing.
So we're running out of time. This is definitely a conversation I'm sure we'll continue to have, but it's good feedback, and
thank you.
Incorporate that into the next document.
So I know we're running out of time. I feel like the life cycle document is kind of meaty, and we just put into the team on Monday. So if you want to forestall that conversation, I think that's a fine idea.
Yeah, I think we should do that.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure, Dan, do you have anything quick? You were in the queue. Or did you not?
Yeah,
maybe you didn't take
DQ.
yourself out. Okay. Okay. All right.
Great.
Then thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I think we're out of time. We'll follow up on the list.